Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today's session is talking about structured data and how we can utilize the Microsoft platform in order to look at all things kind of databases or files that might reside in structured systems. So we're going to walk through a series of different demos today. But before we do that, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So common questions like, can I ask questions to the end or during? Like I've enabled mics today, so if you feel like you've got a burning question, just raise your hand, unmute yourself, and feel free to interrupt me at any point. The slides will be available after the session today. Some of them are quite detailed as well. Some that I won't show that have quite a lot of information in. So it might be a good place to go away and have a look at that after the session. The session is recorded today and will be available on the website in the coming days. So if you missed the session today or you need to drop out, feel free, and then you can always watch a recording back. Also, the Q&A panel is also open as well. So if you've got any questions and you're too afraid to unmute yourself, then you can use the Q&A box there. This is a series of webinars that we've been running through for the last couple of months, really to showcase some of the expertise that we have around data security, our thought leadership within this area, and really how this ties back into cybersecurity and identity as well, which is a series of practices that we run here at Quorum Cyber. So again, these are all on the website. We're looking to do another series in the future. So if you've got any ideas about what you want to see, then feel free to let us know. Bit of an agenda really for the next sort of 30 to 40 minutes maybe. We're going to talk about what data is, what types of data we can see within the Microsoft platforms, but also how we can use Microsoft to look at third-party sources and applications as well. We always talk about being Microsoft first, so we only deal with Microsoft technologies, but it's often a misconception that because it's Microsoft, we can only look at Microsoft stuff. That's definitely not the case. So if you're using things like SAP or Oracle or Workday or say ServiceNow, then we can actually go into those platforms as well and do a bit of data discovery. In some use cases, we can adapt things like session control using conditional access, and we can do data discovery and automatically apply things like classification labels and protection to that data. Now, that is part of the other series, other webinars that we've gone through in the past, and this is more focused on data catalog. So think of this as like a data mapping exercise to look at all of the different repositories you might have within your current estate and be better informed about what they entail. We'll also go into reporting as well as another common question. Like these tools give you a high level overview about what you can see. We'll also touch on Power BI a little bit later about delving deeper into those repositories and then creating custom dashboards from there. But before we do that, let's talk about all the different options when it comes to Microsoft. So again, the misconception is because we're using a Microsoft technology, we can only do stuff in the cloud. That is definitely not the case. So we can utilize services up in 365 to look at classification or data types. There's built-in capabilities up there as well using Activity and Content Explorer that surfaces up the information that's already indexed within that platform. So any data you put within Exchange Online or SharePoint Online is using the indexing under the covers and then automatically surfacing up the types of information you have. So for example, if you were looking to be PCI compliant, then you would be able to see any data types that reside or connect to financial information or credit card information. And that might not be data that you want sat within M365, so you're able to see those reports and actually remediate that from happening. Also part of the Microsoft toolset is something called Microsoft Information Protection Scanner. So that could be a series of scanners or one scanner that's looking at SharePoint server that resides on premises, or it's looking at file servers. So anything that's got like a network share or a file share that you can interrogate. That includes things like Azure files. You can actually use those scanners to do an index of that data and then give you a very detailed report of the types of information you have on premises as well. And we help customers create dashboards about the types of data they have, right down to the verbose level, saying like these items belong to this person, and it was modified or created on these dates. So we can pull metadata out of those reports as well. So again, that was covered in a previous session. And today we're going to talk about structured data. So when we talk about structured data, there's all different types of systems and platforms that you have to deal with. Now, we've already talked about file servers on premises, which is around unstructured data, but we can utilize some of the Microsoft Purview capabilities to look at structured data as well. And we can reuse some of the assets that Microsoft give us to discover that data in different ways. Now, if I fast forward this a second, we can utilize some of the classification services that are built in. So there's over, I think, 200 or nearly 300 different sensitive information types that Microsoft give you out of the box. So that's looking at things that maybe are GDPR specific data, so like PII information that's EU specific. It could be financial information, it could be debit cards, it could be passport numbers, national insurance numbers. And we can utilize those techniques then to surface up where that data sits. And by knowing what's inside that content or those tables within the structured databases, we can also deem whether that information should be classified or not. So we can use our classification scheme up in M365 to say, look, I found this table within our data lake, which shouldn't be there. It now contains PI information, but we have a classification label that says this is highly confidential because it contains customer information. So we're using this data catalog system to surface that up and give us this single pane of glass about where specific types of data resides in lots of different repositories. That's the whole purpose of this. And this slide, I know, is very, very busy. It's basically talking about how we use that data classification service across different realms. Now, although this is a Microsoft slide, I tried to kind of cut this down in different segments to make it easier to understand. So I talk about different realms being either on premises, at the actual endpoint, and the device you're working on in front of you, and in the cloud as well. And just for reference, I've also pulled out the different reports that we can use using Power BI in order to interconnect into those different services and gain insights into that. So you'll both see data catalog here on premises because we can interrogate SQL Server, for example, but you'll also see data catalog on the far right in the middle there, also been able to connect to Azure services or AWS or SAP and all of those as well. So these services can look across those different realms. That's the whole point of it. Another common question I get, because Microsoft changed the branding probably about a year ago now to a suite of products. This is called holistically Microsoft Purview, but Microsoft Purview covers things like Microsoft 365, and it covers a set of Azure services as well. So we're going to be specifically talking about the Azure Purview, what it was previously known as, but now it's actually called Microsoft Purview Data Governance. So this session is all bound around that. Unfortunately, though, because of the branding, people seem to think that it's able to interconnect to everything. I was on with a customer yesterday. They were asking about Dynamics 365 and then utilizing data governance in order to do DLP work. So it's slightly confusing. Like, this tool doesn't do anything around data loss prevention or any of the Microsoft 365 capabilities. It's purely designed as a data catalog, a data mapping exercise. If you surface up any information that data lake shouldn't contain, then your remediation is now better informed because you know where that data is. And then you would go to that native system and then do your discovery or remediation over there. So just to demystify that a little bit, these two solutions are very separate, but they come under the same branding. So what is unified data governance? Well, think of it as a way, and I've explained this earlier on is a single pane of glass that covers not just data governance, but also security as well. So there's a balance between compliance and security, depending on your lens on this data. But it's to better inform you that data now contains sensitive information, or this table now contains certain types of business information that you can curate. So we can use automation, which is really cool to scan the data, but us as data owners or stewards of the data, we can also enrich that information with our knowledge as well manually. And I'll show you a bit of that. As I mentioned, it's designed to look across different platforms. It's looking at a hybrid approach of those different realms and different platforms. SAP is probably the one I keep being asked about over the past kind of 2 or 3 years that the solution's been out. It's also under the covers using things like Apache to using those APIs. So in theory, we can hook up any type of data source to this platform. I'm going to explain that in a little bit as well. But it's holistically looking across all your different resources. Other customers come to us and say, hey, we've got like hundreds of different repositories that we need to keep a closer eye on. How do we do that automatically? Well, there's no silver bullet to this either. We can go in and actually tell the system of the repositories that are important to us. And if you do have 200-300, then you have to hook those up manually. But once that work is done, that Quorum Cyber can help with as well, by the way, we've got that single pane of glass that I'm talking about. Another thing we can do is reuse those assets around data classification, as we already mentioned, but also where that data is derived from. So if we've got a data lake that contains sensitive information, we can use these tools to see the connections of all those different repositories we have and where data flowed from one to the other. So if you've got a data lake that contained credit card information, because you need to maintain your PCI compliance, for example, then we can see where that data was copied to. Maybe it was moved into Power BI, and now there's a different report that contains that sensitive information. And then the person utilizing those reports and that data was, exporting that out to Excel. So we're able to see the flow of where data came from and where it ended up. There's also some information protection capabilities in these tools as well. So as that data is being exported out of Power BI into Excel, the system can automatically classify and then protect, so apply encryption to that content as well to keep that data safe. So that's just something else you might want to be aware of. And then lastly on this, because we know our data and we're the stewards of that data, we might want to create a glossary of terms. So there might be some synonyms that you want to tell the system about, but as people are utilizing this platform, then they get a description about what those business terms are, what the data means, and who the owner of that data is. So we're not going to have time to go into the glossary today, but this tool has lots of different capabilities, which we'll go into in a moment. So if we think from an architectural point of view, Microsoft Purview Data Governance has a number of different buckets. So predominantly today, we're going to be talking about the data map. So of all those different repositories, show me where they live and how they interconnect. We're going to talk a little bit around kind of data insights. So how much of different data types do we have? How much of classification do we have and where those repositories sit? And we'll also talk about data catalog as well. So let's get into it. There's a bunch of different supported sources that you can click on the link below here to gain access to. And there's also a matrix of what you can do with those repositories as well. So if we think about Azure files, we're able to look at the classification of that, maybe the data lineage. We can also look at sharing of that data as well. So this is a really good resource to see what you can do out of the box. But like I said, because it's based on Apache, we can also use those APIs in order to look at other repositories as well. Okay, let's jump into a bit of a demo. So let me just switch screens here for a moment. Okay, so we're over here in the Azure portal, so this is where the data governance tool lives. You'll notice this got the same look and feel as some of the other kind of data lake and reporting capabilities in Azure services. But it gives us a very broad overview of a search box, and we'll go into that in a second, so we can search across those data sets, but also we can browse the assets or even go into the knowledge center as well. So as I mentioned, this is a very, very big tool we're going to scratch the surface of today. But a great place to start is over in the Knowledge Center, where you're going to get a series of videos, learn about how to interconnect all of your repositories and how you gain data from that. So there's a number of different videos, blogs, and tutorials. So the documentation on the Microsoft Docs site is quite detailed. So that might be a really good place to start. But equally, if you're a very visual person like me, then maybe a video is good for you as well. Okay, so the first thing we might want to do when we set up this solution is register a repository to it. So what I can do here is if I go across to my data map, you'll see that I've already done a bit of the hardship in creating different collections. Now, collections can be dependent on what you want to see. Like it could be regional collections. It could be that you want a collection of production databases or test and dev or something else. And you might want to divvy this out to actual data owners that can control this data as well. So you can see that I've got a number of different services that I've joined up here as well, like Fabric, for example, Azure Blob Storage or containers. We've got SAP in here as well and Snowflake. And we'll go into some of those repositories in a second. But once we've done the setup of those collections, we can go in and click register at the very top here. And this is where you can see all of the out-of-the-box connectors that Microsoft has set up. And this is growing all the time, by the way. But it might be that there is a set of Azure services I want this platform to look at. So this Azure multiple means that the system will go away and scan those Azure services and actually bring back the reporting mechanisms for you. If we go into the Azure tab itself, we can see that we've got SQL Server, Azure Blob that we can hook into, Azure Data Lakes, MySQL, Azure Files. So there's quite a lot from the Azure side. But also when we go into databases, you can see that we can also choose from Amazon as well, and some of the others, right? And we've got SAP down the bottom. So you can see already that it's very, very easy to set up those repositories. So for example, if we went into SAP, we could click on Next, and this is where we can provide the server name and the port number in order to connect to that platform. And then we can go away and actually register that. And that's what you're seeing on this other screen here, where I've already set up some of those repositories. Once we've done that and we've got that connection working, the way that the platform is designed to scan that data is done on a scheduled basis. Now, when you go through and actually set up the Azure service for data governance, it'll tell you how much compute do you need and how much is going to cost to actually run this service. And this is taking snapshots of the data within these repositories. So if I go into my Azure blob for a second, we can actually click on new scan and actually go through and set up a new scan for that repository. So we give it a name, we give it a runtime, which I'm not going to go through today, some credentials in order to access that repository. So that has to be set up prior to this. And then we can click on continue. And it's failed. Oh, lovely. Okay. Why did that fail? Oh, got a lot of live demos, haven't you? So let me just test this a second. Actually, let's go into one of these shares. I haven't shared that before. Okay. So I've got one scan here. Okay, let's try this one. So let's try a new scan. We've got scan name, we've got the share name of the Azure container. So what we'll do is just pop over to my storage accounts and check the file share name, which is Azure Files Hosking. There we go. This is quite an old repository, and it's a reason why I can't remember where it is. But good to show you like where that information is stored. The credential I want to use. So I've already got a key vault set up for Azure Files, and this is the collection. So the segregation, or the logical segregation of where that repository sits. And then I hit continue. Okay, we're working. So now it can see that under that Azure storage, there's about 77 files within my test repository. That's fine. So that's what I want to select. And if I go to the next screen, now it's going to say what types of information do I want to scan against. So think of this as like the data classification. Out of the box, we get these rule sets. So this is a system default. And we can click on view detail to fully understand what the data types is going to have a look at. So let's quickly have a look at that. These are the file types that we can scan and extract. So obviously there's some supported files and tables of the data we want to find. And then from a classification rules, we can see there's 209 built-in classification types. So these are curated by Microsoft, so we can't change these, but we can create our own, which I'll show you later on. So we can see these are categorized into government. So we can see Australia, business numbers and driver's licenses. If we go into financial, we can see bank accounts, credit card numbers. These are all regionalized as well. SWIFT codes, US bank accounts. There's a base classification, personal items, which are bundled entities. So things that contain like full names and addresses, date of birth, which is pretty cool. So again, these are all built in. Common passwords we can check against as well. So if you've got Azure Files, for example, and you want to check that there's no usernames and passwords in there, we can use that. IP addresses, which is PII information under GDPR. So that's a pretty cool set to start scanning on. As I mentioned, you can create your own scan rule as well and have like a subset of those, or even some custom types that you've created yourself. So that could be based on a list of keywords or regex or pattern matching. I know of some customers as well that are using these techniques in order to do a bit of a data discovery method for files that sit on premises. We can do exactly the same within Azure Files as well. So we're better informed from a data governance point of view. Once we picked up our scan, then we're going to set a schedule. Now, remember, this is going to be a snapshot view, so you might not want this running like every second of every day, because it could be quite expensive. But we could take a snapshot once right now, or we could have this reoccurring depending on the rate of change and how often we want to see an updated report. So this is where I can configure that. And once I do that, then I can go off and actually save and run the scan then. So once that's gone off, that might take a little while, depending on the data set and what you're trying to index. We can, when we do the scans as well, we can choose whether we're going to do like a full scan. So I could run a full scan now, or I could do an incremental scan of the changes. Probably the full scan is going to be a full index. That might take quite a while, but any file changes, then we can actually update the index with and then bring in anything new. Okay, so like I said, once we've run that scan, we're able to see that there were 18 assets discovered within there, and of those assets, about 15 were classified, which we can go into the reports for. Okay, so let's have a look what that is. So if we go back up to data map for a second, this is giving us a nice map view of all of the interconnections and the collections, like I've said. You can also view this in a table format as well, if you just want to see the name of the different repositories you're connected to and some other telemetry on the side here. If we want to go directly into the collections and see the data, we can do that here. So if we go under United Kingdom, do we go into our assets? This is where we can see a list of all the different files. These file names are generic, by the way. These would normally be proper file names instead of kind of weird GUIDs. But you can see we've got a bunch of Excel files and PowerPoint files here as well. So we can quickly go into these and gain more insights into the metadata that they hold. So we can see an overview of that, so where the data actually came from, the hierarchy of that. We can see any classifications that are inside that specific Excel document. We can see the properties of that file as well. So we can see things like modified time, the path of where it lives, fully qualified domain name, so on and so forth. If this data derived from somewhere else or was being copied to another place or Power BI, we'll be able to see that. I'll show you that in a second. We can also define experts and owners of this data as well. So you might go in here and want to understand like who is the owner, who's the controller of this data. So you can define that. And then any other related information alongside that individual file. Okay, so that's a pretty kind of noddy way of looking through your data. You may have noticed as well, we've got a very large search box up here as well. So if I wanted to look across that data for anything that contained the word customer, it's able to look across all of the different repositories that we've told the system about where customer is mentioned. So in here, we can see customer is in an Azure SQL table. Equally, this could be Azure Server as well on premises. We can see customer address, customer ID, file within an Azure file, and a sales order header in a SQL table as well. So we can go into these just like I just shown you. So this specific SQL table is saying that I have 3 different classifiers of data within that table. So when we're doing the scan, is looking at the tables, we're also looking at the rows as well, so we can gain that information, that insight. But we can see the entities here with full names, there's email addresses, and there's US specific telephone numbers. And then we can hover over these to get more telemetry on the confidence level, the sample count. So we can see it's quite high percentage of confidence within there, it contains it. We can also go into the schema here as well, and then see of that table, all the different rows that contain that classification. Now, if the system picked up that there was data that should be classified or applied a sensitivity label as highly confidential, we would see those markers here as well. Within SQL, we can actually write into the table the classification name. Now that's dependent on the repositories that you're working on. For files, I don't believe it, I have to double check this, it doesn't write back into the file of the sensitivity label. And there's other repositories that might say that it contains highly confidential information, but is just telling you about it. So this is all a data catalog platform, right? Not a way of protecting the data automatically. Now, in some cases, you as the data owner, you will know your data a lot better than the system. So we could apply that scan and automatically discover different types of information, which is pretty cool. We can create our custom types as well. But also we can go in and actually edit this list. So if there's a specific table I know contains sensitive information or a classification, not only can I override what the system's automatically picked up, but I can also pick, I don't know what else coming up, also pick other classifications as well. So we can manually curate that, and we can also apply our glossary of terms if we've set that up as well. So you might have tax information, and what does tax mean to our business? So you can actually set that. Okay, so not only might we want to look for customer information, but we can also use the filters on the left-hand side here to define that where it says customer, I also want to find where the email addresses are. So we can use this filter across all those different data sets to gain better insights. So we've got some Azure tables there. Just trying to look for that file actually. Here we go, this customer ID docx file. Now it doesn't have any classifications. Okay, so it's got customer in the name of the file, excuse me, and there's no contacts with it. Okay, I was hoping for a bit more metadata than that, but let's search for financial information. Here we go. Financial credit card numbers. So looking across the data set now for anything that contains credit card numbers. So we've got some Azure files here. So let's click on this one instead then. We can see not only does it contain credit card numbers, but also debit card numbers as well. There's one instance in there and it's high. We can click on the properties to gain more insights about the metadata of that. Is this one got any contacts? No, okay. So I've not set this one up. But you can see that we can now be better informed about what that content or the asset contains. So if that file shouldn't be sat there containing that information, then I can pivot across to Azure Files and actually do my remediation over there. Another common misconception is some customers think that this is an e-discovery platform, and it is not that. So it can look inside content for like Azure Files and tables, but it's not going to actually give you the content. So it's not an e-discovery platform either. But again, we're better informed now from a security and a compliance perspective of what those repositories contain. Let's head over to data maps and classifications. Now, in here is a list of all of the built-in types that we can choose from, but we might want to create our own. We know we've got full physical addresses here, but maybe there's something more specific we want to work on, like UK passport numbers. So what I can do here is create a grouping of my own. So I could call it Forum Cyber Group. And I can define my own classifiers in here. So I could use some of the system one and some of our own custom types. And if we go across the classification rules, this is where I can create a new one. So maybe we're creating one called postcodes. You might want to give a description about what it means, what the classification name is. So we just picked that up, called Forum Cyber Group. And then how do I want to find that information? So we can use a dictionary, so a list of words to do that discovery, or we could use regular expressions. Now, I don't fancy writing every single postcode that I can think of into a dictionary. So we're going to use a pattern in order to find it. So here we can define the regex, or the pattern that we're looking for, and just save a bit of time. This is a regular expression that should be able to pick up UK postcodes. The interesting part about UK postcodes is just not the British Isles as such, well, as in UK, but there's also other countries, other islands that has UK passports as well. So if you think about Gibraltar, that has a UK postcode. And we could also do, if it was in a table in a database, we could also define a pattern of what column name that we want to search on as well. And we've got some thresholds that we can fine tune. Here we can also test the classification as well. So if I go in, I've created like a dummy CSV file that contains some postcodes in it, and actually test that regex before we send it off and find nothing. So we want to ensure that is working. And here we can see that we've got 3 different columns that has picked up postcodes within that CSV file. So we know our regex works, which is brilliant. And then we can go in and actually create that. So as and when we do that scan that I showed you earlier on, then we can define our custom groups and the types of information we want to find. We help customers as well search across their data set that is unique to them. So if you've got customer reference numbers or IDs or employee IDs or something like that, we can actually tune the platform in order to find that relevant information as well. Okay, so we've talked about kind of browsing the assets, the data maps. So the data maps is just showing the resources, like I said, but we can actually go in and find the assets within those repositories. So you know where to look. That's the whole point of this. And then we talked about the filters and being able to search specific information, which is pretty cool. And data lineage is probably the next place to go. But before we do that, let's go into a bit of reporting. So we can go into data estate insights. We're not going to have time to go through the stewardship today, but we're going to go into the classifications part. And this gives us a high-level view of the data that the platform has scanned. How much categories of information do we have? So here we've got 2 government classifications, one that's personal, one's financial. Pretty simple. And then we can also see the top classifications across that data set. Now you can go in and view the details of how many different types of information we have. So we can see that like, there's 3 files here that contain credit card numbers. So that's pretty cool. What we can't do in here, though, is we can't export any of this information out. So you're having to use these tools and the reports that you're given in order to delve deeper into that information. But here we could click on those 3 items, actually create the filter for us, and then we can see those 3 items or those tables that contain that type of information. So that's how you would use the platform. Now you may have noticed as I was kind of clicking around here that there is at the very top right, if we go into one of these, there's a Power BI button that appears. Now I could never find it when I'll find it. Data sources here. Okay, where am I? I'm doing something wrong today. But the Power BI button allows you to connect to that data source where you can connect your own data sources to. So I'm going to jump to a bit of a slide demo for a second to show you that. Okay, so of the repositories that we've got set up, we can actually go in to the assets here, and then we can see all of the tables that we might want to report on. Now the actual tool, the Microsoft tool, is able to scan and understand the schema of the data, which is pretty neat. But we can translate or copy that data across to Power BI and actually create our own reports that connect directly to that repository. So Power BI doesn't connect to Microsoft Purview, unfortunately, but we can create reports from here that we could deeply interrogate that data and where that data lives. So again, these slides and the demo are all in the deck. This is the button I was looking for and failed to find. The very top right here is the open Power BI dashboard where we can drill into that. So let's show you what that looks like. So when we're clicking on that button, it's going to open up Power BI dashboard and give us all of that schema that Microsoft Purview now understands. And then we can choose the different tables that we might want to report on. So here we can say, get all the categories, the product list, the addresses, and the customer names. It gives a view of that, and then we can start to load that information. Now, depending on the type of query that you want to build in that, we might want to import that data or query directly to that database. Now, if there's a lot of information you're importing, that could take a considerable amount of time, but you might want to query that database directly if you want to. And then from there, you're actually left with a blank desktop. So you have to go in and choose the data sources you want as part of that report. And then you can use the visualizations about what you want to see as part of that reporting mechanism. So here I've got a count of address IDs, and then I've started to pull the information from the names and addresses that you can see here. So we can just drag those on to our visualizations if we need to. There is also a way of seeing that data lineage that I just talked about. So we're able to see, going back to Microsoft Purview for a second, not to confuse you, actually see where certain types of information have come from. So in this screenshot, you can see data that's come from a database, namely TwitterDB. You can see then that is transferred up into a Power BI data set. So that data was copied somewhere else. And then it was actually published into a Power BI dashboard. So you've got this proliferation of potentially sensitive information, but now you've got a map, a data map of where that data came from and to. Also, just conscious of time, there's a bunch of resources that I've just shown you within the portal you can gain access to. Namely, you can go directly to the Microsoft Learn site to understand all of the kind of depth and breadth that Microsoft Purview gives you. We also specialize within these tools as well specifically from a data security point of view. So the way that we look at the assessments today with customers is this three-pronged approach. So understanding and doing that data discovery or that data mapping exercise we believe is key. So understanding where your data lives. And that's really a process and people view first before we jump into the tech, right? You need to understand of what repositories you want the platform to go and scan first. So you might want to do that in a priority order. So we help customers do that. And then we also look at the sensitive data and preventing oversharing of sensitive information or blocking that. So using things like data loss prevention alongside things like insider risk. But what we try and do is do a wraparound. So rather than just implementing these technologies for technology's sake, we also look at the specific regulations or assessments or directives that you have to deal with within your business, and then use that as a framework and understand, what databases we need to go and learn more about. And then that gives us the framework to go away and actually do that for you. Now, we do have some Microsoft funding that you might be eligible for. This is typically like a 4-week engagement. It doesn't mean that you have to spend 4 weeks of your time, but typically when we run through a series of workshops, show you the technology, much like we've done through today, I actually want to leave something tangible behind with you as well. So for that, setting up things like on-premises scanner, or understanding the architecture of that, or even setting up things like the data governance platform I ran through the day, actually do that within that 4-week engagement and then leave that behind with you working. But the whole purpose is to show you some of the capabilities that you have today within your current licenses, maybe something that you don't have today. Like, we don't get compensated on you buying more licenses from Microsoft at all. But if you want to sweat the asset that you already have, we're able to provide the recommendations about the business impact, what you can do today, and then a roadmap of the types of things you might want to look at over the course of like a 1 or 2 year period. And then it's over to you. It's up to you whether you want to continue wanting our help or not, or you're kind of better informed about the types of things you might need to drive forward within the business. So again, these slides will be available after the session today, but this is what you typically receive after those workshops. So with that actually ends this part of the series. I just want to say thank you very much for your time today, and lastly, open up for any Q&A. But again, thank you very much for your time.